Florida State has had a much better season than virtually anyone expected. Before the season, many doubted that this roster that was patched together of mostly 3-stars and transfers could replace the two most productive players it had in Jermaine Johnson and Jashawn Corbin. But they did, and they found a way to improve on all three levels of the game on their way to a 9-3 regular season record. I think this achievement deserves a closer look, so I'm going to approach it in the only way I know how, by relaying the story that the film and stats tell. So let's jump into things with FSU's first game of the season, a big win over Duquesne. So I wanted to start with Duquesne not because of any significance of the game itself, but because it helps establish a couple of things that will come up over the course of the video. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. The bread and butter of Mike Norvell's offense at FSU has been counter, and you see it in the very first play of the season. In counter, the entire offensive line blocks down on their guy, giving them good angles, while two blockers, usually a tight end and a guard, pull to the other side of the line to open up a gap. Here, Duquesne crashes hard on these pullers, which highlights Trayshawn Ward's vision and patience as he bounces the run outside. These factors make him a particularly effective running back for counter. What's really kind of unique about Norvell's offense is that he also runs outside zone. Both outside zone and counter require a decent time commitment in practice, but if you can run both, you have two powerful tools for the run game. Early on in the season, you can see that outside zone, a play where the entire line tries to block to the outside of their man, which opens up big cutback lanes, wasn't working for FSU. So they leaned heavy on the counter run game. And once this play sucked up the defense, they were able to hit shots over the top to 6'7" receiver Johnny Wilson, which was a luxury they hadn't had in years past. This game also showed something important for FSU defensively. Their all-ACC safety, Jamie Robinson, not only patrolled deep in a traditional safety role, but also showed off his versatility, stepping into the box in more of a hybrid linebacker role. Okay, so let's see how some of these things played out in their first real game of the season against LSU in New Orleans. In the preseason, I made a video outlining that FSU was immensely more successful on offense when they utilized motion, but what I didn't expect was how much control they would give quarterback Jordan Travis. Good offenses usually have some method of keeping a defense off balance. For some teams, that's motion, for some teams, it's hurry up, but this FSU team did something you rarely see in the college game. They let the quarterback consistently get the offense in the right play at the line of scrimmage, which allowed them to adjust in real time to what the defense was showing them. LSU had one of the most talented rosters in the country last season, but FSU knew that they could be a bit vanilla in the first game with a new coaching staff. This gave a good training ground for Jordan Travis to exhibit complete control of the offense against a real opponent. Here's an example. On third downs, LSU brought pressure from the Sam linebacker off the edge. On this play, it wasn't picked up and led to Jordan Travis having to throw the ball away. Later in the game, on another third down, JT and Micah Pittman recognized the same pressure off the edge, and Travis replaces the blitzer with the ball to pick up the first. This game also showed how FSU wanted to play defense. You could tell that the coaching staff felt that the strength of the defense was in the defensive line, and basically all game they kept two safeties back, which provided extra support for an inexperienced group of corners at the expense of keeping a light box against the run. This gamble worked in this game for the most part. Outside of a couple broken coverages in the fourth quarter, FSU was able to mostly stifle the Tigers, holding them to their fourth lowest yards per play on the season. FSU got away with a close victory in this one, and in a way, it prepped them for their next big opponent, Louisville. Offensively, FSU started out hot. Louisville was being very aggressive against the run, pretty much living with an extra safety in the box. This meant that FSU could find success on chunk plays in the passing game. However, the offense began to dry up, and some of that came because Louisville was able to mix up some looks for Travis. Here, Louisville sends an overload blitz on the right side of the line that doesn't get picked up, which causes Jordan Travis to have to throw the ball away. The next snap, they show a very similar pre-snap alignment. Travis probably thinks that Louisville is in man and he's going to get a mismatch with this running back on a linebacker. However, Louisville actually drops into a soft zone and puts a hard cap on this wheel route and shuts the play down before it starts. The momentum further swung when JT went down for the remainder of the game, and the Noles had to turn to their inexperienced backup Tate Rodemaker. Rodemaker looked really shaky in his limited action before the half. Throwing was honestly one of the worst picks you'll see by someone without a U on their helmet, but he came out in the second half and looked like a completely different player. If Louisville was trying to shut down the run before, they ratcheted up the presence in the box versus the new quarterback. This allowed Norvell to scheme him some easy completions. They mostly went to this RPO where he reads the safety. If he comes down to stop the run, then Rodemaker takes the one-on-one matchup against Johnny Wilson on the outside. However, Louisville adjusted and began slow playing the RPO, where this safety would stay back until the read was made and then crash down hard. Norvell then drew up a counterpunch with a true play action. If the safety was going to slow play the RPO, then they knew they could get a shot in over his head with a true run fake. While the offense was mostly a success, the same couldn't be said for the defense. Between LSU's Jaden Daniels and Louisville's Malik Cunningham, FSU faced two of the better dual-threat quarterbacks in the country in their first 3 games of the season, and they came out with a similar strategy to that of the LSU game, mostly just trying to keep 2 safeties back and allow their defensive line to work. However, injuries started piling up on the defensive line, with Fabian Lovett going out at the end of the LSU game and Jared Verse missing most of this game. The Cardinals were able to move the ball pretty effectively by clearing out FSU secondary and letting Cunningham take advantage of the empty space. The offense was ultimately able to overcome this as the Noles turned their sights on the next ACC opponent in Boston College. There isn't a ton to say about this game. FSU felt more comfortable being aggressive defensively and completely shut down the BC offense. This gave good field position for the offense, who was able to take advantage. Boston College really tried to shut down the run and take away easy passes by pressing their corners, but Norvell was able to manufacture big plays on the outside using screens. So FSU was 4-0 heading into their first ranked matchup of the season, a home game against Wake Forest. Wake Forest has one of the better and most unique offenses in the country, but their defense hasn't been up to the same standard. However, they were able to hold FSU to only 21 points. In the Louisville game, FSU lost their starting left tackle in Robert Scott. Wake took advantage of this by using what's called a wide 9, which basically means they played their defensive ends really wide, which gave them a better angle to speed rush around FSU's slower-footed tackles. This stalled drives when they got into obvious passing downs, as they could generate a pass rush while keeping as many people back in coverage as possible. On the other side of the ball, I think the loss of Fabian Lovett continued to haunt the Noles. Wake runs a slow mesh RPO heavy system. Basically, they ride this slow mesh and read this safety. If he even hesitates, it allows them to take a shot over his head to their best receiver, A.T. Perry. FSU did not want that to happen, and true to form tended to keep 2 safeties back in hope of keeping a cap on Wake's passing game. However, in true RPO fashion, that meant Wake would give the ball. However, with all the injuries on FSU's line, it meant that they were losing the battle on the line of scrimmage. Add in that FSU didn't have anyone who could truly line up with A.T. Perry on the outside, and Wake was able to pull this one out on the road. This game was followed by another tough opponent in NC State. NC State has one of the better defenses in the country, and they showed why in this game. FSU struggled to get the counter run game going, so they reached in their back pocket and got the ball moving early with some outside zone, which allowed them to put up 17 points in the first half. However, at halftime, NC State made some adjustments. Just like what I showed against Louisville, they were able to do a good job of disguising their run blitzes. On this play, FSU motions the back in the backfield, and NC State is showing a base alignment, which means that Jordan Travis is comfortable running into this look. However, after the snap, they bring the heat and blow the play up in the backfield. The failing run game put extra pressure on Travis, who uncharacteristically forced a couple of throws into traffic. The other side of the ball was a different story. FSU's defense shut down an admittedly mediocre offense, hampered even further by losing their star quarterback in the second half. Ultimately, FSU lost this game from mistakes. A baffling penalty on a punt and another questionable penalty on an important second half drive put the nail in the coffin for the Noles. FSU then faced their 3rd ranked opponent in a row, hosting the Clemson Tigers at Doak. For the most part, FSU's offense found success against Clemson. Clemson felt like they could stop FSU's run game while keeping 2 safeties back, but for the most part, they were unsuccessful. This was really Trey Benson's breakout game. Benson is more of a natural zone running back since he's built to take one cup and use his top end speed to get upfield. FSU leveraged this with his under center look to allow Benson to get downhill quickly against Clemson's lighter boxes. In a game of 2 heavyweights exchanging blows, FSU was the first to flinch with a costly fumble late in the first half that gave Clemson an easy 7 points and all the momentum going into the half. This was enough of an edge for Clemson to hold on to the lead for the rest of the game. Clemson's offense really seemed to want to attack FSU right outside of the tackles. This toss play is a good example. It requires FSU's secondary to be aggressive towards the run, which they don't do here. However, they adjust later in the game or are able to shut down the same look. They also frequently went to bunch sets to isolate the nickel defender in space for easy completions. Plus, Clemson again took advantage of FSU's depleted defensive line, and their running back Will Shipley is hard to stop if he's given a head of steam. This was the most predictable loss of the season, and after 3 straight, things weren't looking good for the Noles, but some wins were on the horizon. For the sake of time, I'm going to group these games together, because the story is pretty similar for all 3. Offensively, FSU was able to dominate the defensive lines and run the ball at will. When a Mike Norvell offense is allowed to run, they will, and they total over 200 rushing yards a game in this span. On defense, they could keep 2 safeties back, and since they returned Lovett and were facing inferior offensive lines, they had success stopping the run as well. In general, if FSU could get away with keeping 2 safeties back, they were going to have an exceptionally good game on the defensive side of the ball. Okay, now on to the final game of the season, a home matchup against Florida. By the end of the year, Florida seemed like it would be a relatively easy win for Florida State. The Gators had just come off a loss to Vanderbilt and was playing on a short week where they had back-to-back road games. However, the Gators came to play. UF was bent on stopping the run, often stacking the box and daring FSU to take shots on the outside. They did a few times and got some chunk plays, but that seemed to be something the Gators were willing to live with. However, what they were hoping to avoid was chunk plays in the running game, but that's easier said than done with Benson as the primary running back. FSU leaned hard on the outside zone, breaking off a few big runs early. Plus, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Travis's play in this game. UF was making it difficult to find consistent success in the run game, especially in the red zone, and he was able to use his legs to generate Houdini-like plays to get FSU in scoring position. On the other side of the ball, UF's offense isn't particularly good in the red zone, so they live and die off being able to hit shot plays. FSU knew this and generally tried to keep 2 safeties high, but even with Lovett in, they were losing the battle in the trenches and letting UF march down the field in the run game. UF was particularly successful using double teams to reset the defensive line backwards. UF only had 1 starting receiver available, and so they wanted to make sure that when they took their shot, they took it against the best matchup they could find. Here they motion a receiver across the line of scrimmage, which forces FSU to switch their nickel corner onto UF's best receiver. Their quarterback sees the mismatch and gets an easy touchdown on a double move. FSU adjusted first by going to a 5-man front, which eliminated UF's double teams, and by putting in Greedy Vance, a true coverage corner at the nickel position to help stop Pearsall.
These adjustments were enough to buy a couple of stops and come away with a final win and an invitation to the Cheez-It Bowl to face off against Oklahoma. Oklahoma did their homework going into the game against FSU. They did a good job of varying their blitzes and stalling drives early in the game with tackles for loss, notably by playing fairly aggressive towards the run. FSU found some success late in the half by taking advantage of this aggressiveness using RPOs and play action, which in turn loosened up the defensive line to reopen the run game, and Trayshawn Ward in particular was able to gash them for a few big runs. The defensive side of the ball was a similar story to Florida in my opinion. Despite being out a few offensive linemen, Oklahoma was able to push around FSU's defensive line, who was again missing Lovett. FSU was torched a few times, even with 2 safeties back through the air, so they felt like they had to stay relatively passive on the back end. But ultimately, the Noles were able to notch a final victory to put double digits in the win column. Florida State had a much better season than any expected. In my own season preview, my closing statement was that FSU doesn't have the talent to make a run, but they're going to be a really tough team to beat. And in reflection, I think that's mostly true, but off in a key respect. I think FSU did have the top talent to win out this season, and I think fans should be dang proud of what they accomplished. What they truly lacked was the depth to operate at almost top capacity when 1 or 2 players went down. To me, losing Robert Scott and Fabian Lovett for some of the toughest games on the schedule hamstrung the team, but the team still showed fight and almost pulled off the impossible. The good news is that depth will come, and this staff has proven this year that they're capable of growing and developing players. And because of that, the future is really bright in Tallahassee. This video was obviously not comprehensive. There are people, plays, and topics that have big influence on the season that I couldn't cover in this short video. One example is the shorthand of 2 high safeties. It's a useful tool I can use to describe a coverage quickly, but it doesn't really get the full picture. So I'm going to spend this offseason really diving into those things to dissect how this team works, what they did well, the things they struggled in. So to make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a video. Thanks for watching.